Ignite Live webcast. I am broadcasting to you live from Orlando, Florida on the Expo Hall floor of Ignite. As you can probably hear the background noise, there's still quite a bit of activity going on here this afternoon. It's been pretty busy today. I'm joined by my fellow partners in crime here, Chris Webb, you all know, Dimitri, who did our last webcast on Microsoft Flow, so you all may have seen his webcast. I don't think we had you on camera during that one, though, so now you can see what he looks like. And Don Kirkham with us as well. So in today's webcast, we're going to just highlight the things we learned today in the keynote. It was almost 2 hours long, so there's a lot of information that came in the keynote today, quite a lot of Azure stuff. But we got a fair bit of Office and Teams and SharePoint stuff as part of that as well. So we're going to go over the things that we picked out from the highlights. And then as we go through the week on our subsequent webcasts, we'll dig down deeper into some of these areas. So tomorrow we have Laura Rogers on. We'll dig into Power Apps and Power Automate, etc. On Thursday, we have Rob Bogue joining us. We'll talk more about ECM and Cortex and some of those various pieces. But today, we're going to just give you a general overview of what we saw today, our thoughts on it, how we feel about it, what we took away from it. A little bit of housekeeping before we get there, of course, as usual. If you have any questions, please post them to the chat channel. We'll be monitoring the chat channel for any questions. Let us know if there are any technical glitches. If you do have some issues with the feed, you might want to switch to the webinar mode that allows you to buffer and stream the broadcast. Tends to clear up any audio or video issues that you might be having. But hopefully everything works well.
We are on some conference networks, and we'll see how that goes.
Fortunately, we're hardwired at this one, but the Wi-Fi here has been extremely spotty. Hopefully, the hardwired internet, they won't shut us off right at 5 o'clock. And this will continue to go. There's sessions still going on till like 6:30 or 6:45 or something.
Pretty late.
Right? So it's going pretty late today. Our sponsors for this one are BinaryWave and Training Plus. We have various sponsors throughout the week for our webcast this time around. Everyone should be familiar with our primary sponsors, though, as well. Here is our schedule. Today's webcast, obviously, coming to you live right now. Tomorrow will be at the same time, broadcasting from the podcast center here on the event floor, which is about 50 yards away from us over on the other side. We'll do the same thing on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, our schedule shifts. We'll do 1:30 in the afternoon Central Time. And then on Friday, our last webcast will be a roundup of the week. I think we've also got John White joining us on Friday to talk some Power BI stuff. And so that'll happen at 11:30. So I apologize for the fact that we're jumping around the schedule a bit. That's the only time we could get booked into the podcast center, which is a much quieter environment, a little more set up for these kinds of things. We had to do a bit of running around today to find this spot here, so we lucked out that we have it. Our previous videos are available on our YouTube channel, on our series channel. I think about 2 weeks ago we posted Dimitri's video, so that is now up on our YouTube channel. For everyone who registered for that, you can go check it out. We are recording these, of course, so we'll post the videos probably not until I get back and have some good, consistent bandwidth to upload all of those to YouTube next week. We'll try and get them to videos as quick as we can. This will be our last series of webcasts this year. Before we resume again in January. No word yet on a holiday party. We're working on it. We need a sponsor for that event. It's pretty expensive to put on. And so we're working on that. So we'll let you know in the next couple of weeks if we'll do the annual holiday party again as well. All right, so let's jump right into the announcements for today. For those of you who weren't on the live stream earlier, it was a bit of an interesting this one time around. They bounced from the stage to the floor, and then back to the stage, and had a number of presenters that I guess it's just the Azure people, because I don't know who they are, but it was kind of odd.
Yeah, instead of having the demos on stage, they would just kick them out to the floor and have the demos from the floor.
Yeah. Which I found that must have taken some logistical planning to get all that together, make sure the video feeds were working. I mean, the audio was good, the video was good.
It seemed to work.
It seemed like
Very smooth.
yeah, and I thought everybody did well for being on the spot like that. Of course, Satya is really good at doing those keynote things, but I know some of those other people had done. But I thought everybody was on point. They did a really good job.
It was fun kind of watching people in the background that didn't really realize what was going on and kind of would walk into the frame. And
Were you down here?
Yeah, no,
Or
you could just watch it online. It's like
Okay.
people would walk in the frame, they're like, "What's up?" and then off they go.
They didn't know they were part of the keynote.
Exactly. Yeah.
I love it. So that was an interesting one. You know, typical mix of videos and stuff in there as well. You know, a lot of visioning stuff. But I thought he actually provided a fair amount of detail for these high-level kind of keynotes, especially in the Azure stuff. There was a lot of
Absolutely.
stuff got announced there. So we're not going to cover the Azure stuff. This isn't the Azure user group, but there was a lot of Azure content. So you can go on the website and see. I think a lot of the session content will be posted on video. It's supposed to be soon. Won't it? So you'll be able to get some information about all those Azure announcements. There were a lot of them, and there was a lot of really cool stuff in there. So if you dabble in Azure, bunch of stuff for you to dig into. The Synapse stuff was cool. The live, that demo they did against the Google Big, that was awesome.
Yeah, they took a couple of shots at some of the competitors.
Yeah,
this
they
morning.
did. The AWS icon that looked like it was on fire.
Exactly.
That was pretty good. So there were a lot of really good Azure announcements that came out, and it took a while, as it usually does, to get to the Office and SharePoint and stuff. But better part of a half hour, maybe 40 minutes, when you count Teams and everything. And were you watching the?
Yeah, I was watching it.
Yeah.
So, well, he started at the bottom of the stack. So the Office stuff is obviously at the very top of the
Yeah,
stack.
and somewhere in the stack was trust. I'm not sure how that's in a technical sense.
Yeah, I don't know.
So some of the big announcements that we got today for SharePoint are around, a lot of this is around enterprise content management and publishing and communication. It's no surprise probably that was coming. They've been doing the hub sites and the comm sites, and that's been a big focus of revamping the whole intranet experience. Some of the things we've already seen, home sites, right? We've seen those already. We know they're now in GA, but there was some cool new stuff that kind of got glossed over quickly. I know you were watching Jeff Teeper's presentation, where he went deep into that. That was this afternoon, right?
Yeah, around last hour ago.
About an hour and a half ago. So it was. So that's probably the deeper dive of the share. Did you go to that?
Oh, yeah, I was there in person.
Yeah. What was your thoughts on that?
I thought it was very, very interesting. A lot of things that have been discussed about previously have been made generally available. There was a great new feature announcement about files being supported up to 100 gigs, which is huge in the context of SharePoint files. And with that, also the differential sync in OneDrive now applies to all different files. They actually did a really nice demo on stage where they had a large Photoshop file. They made a change in Photoshop. They exported it to JPEG. And the JPEG version that they exported overwrote a previous version of the JPEG file. As we know, JPEGs are compressed, and it's not necessarily one-for-one with what you do in Photoshop. But they were able to show that sync happened almost instantaneously because the actual bytes that changed in the JPEG file were very small.
So it's only doing the diff, right? Like the shredded files.
Exactly. And it applies no longer just to Office files, but now to zip files, PSTs, Photoshop files.
Yeah.
Pretty much any content.
Time out on the PST though. I've been getting a lot of that on the tech community. Not a good idea to do. It'll probably technically work, the differential sync, but try to import your PSTs to Exchange.
I'm just quoting Jeff from his session today.
Yeah.
Is there a list of supported file types, or is it pretty much anything goes?
Great question. I don't think we've seen official documentation yet.
Okay.
From the last I saw on the blog, they said the Office files are supported now, with the other files spinning up soon.
Okay.
Didn't exactly say when or if it's all file types.
Okay.
It's kind of vague. So
Okay. But the 100 gig limitation is across the board now,
yeah,
right?
SharePoint, OneDrive.
Well, okay, I was going to ask that question. Now, speaking of DFW user group members, we're live right now. Demetrius, come on. Come back. Come back here. So Dimitri just showed up. In fact, if Don Ebert wants evidence that Demetrius is here, come stand behind me. Because here is, just pop into the camera real quick when you lean down. See, Don, he's here. He's actually here. Yeah, I'm. Oh, do he says good enough.
Wait, you guys right there?
He's right on.
Oh, he was talking about the audio.
Yeah, sorry about the background noise. We're right by the Microsoft Mechanics stage. So if you want to sit in, you can, but the camera's only covering like from here down. Feel free. We're pretty near the Microsoft
He
Mechanics
said,
stage.
make
so
sure
it's
you're
kinda
working
noisy,
hard.
behind us.
I just passed my MS 900 certification exam.
All
There
right.
you go.
Microsoft.
Congratulations.
Microsoft certified.
Microsoft certified.
Fundamental certified.
All right, there we
There you
go.
go.
Brand new certified, rock and roll. So the 100 gigabyte limit applies across all file types, but we're not sure about the differential, what it's going to support just yet.
They said all file types, so
Really?
the blog read like it wasn't all of them. So
Okay.
gotta make. We'll try to find that out and let you guys know during the week.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things I'm excited about is multilingual translations now properly done, not the clunky old way we used to have to do multilingual in the past with page variations. Now you can just switch the language right on the fly. I assume it's doing some machine translation of the pages. Do we know how that's working exactly? Or are you supplying your own
I think
translation?
you're doing your own. I noticed you got a drop down on your page now. You can just drop it down to the language you want it to be in, then you design it, and then they pretty much can just have that option to change to what language you want.
It wasn't clear from the demo. It almost looked like there was some on-the-fly translation going on there, but I'm not.
Yeah, Jeff did reference it to being a proper multilingual support in modern sites. When I think proper, I think if someone wants to translate it manually, they would have that option too. And if machine learning is part of it, I wouldn't be surprised.
I wonder if there's a submit for translation. You know, when we got the translation service in 2013, I wonder if it's like that where you can submit it for
If they
translation.
don't now, I'm sure it will come at some point.
Demetrius, were you in the Teepers presentation?
No, I was taking my test at that time.
Oh,
I tried
okay.
to reschedule, unfortunately, but they couldn't. So
Okay. So I thought that was really cool because you can't do a proper global internet unless you have translations. This has been a problem forever in the product. So hopefully they're doing a really good job on that. We have yet to see, of course, a lot of this is just demoware at this point, right? So we haven't gotten our hands on some of this stuff, so we don't quite know how it's going to work. But it looked really cool. Drop down, change your language. I wonder if it's looking for the browser user agent string in that, if it'll automatically display. I bet it does. I bet it looks for the user agent string. And if you have a match, that's how variations worked. If you had a match, then it would show that page. So that looked really cool. Will apply to all the modern publishing, right? So communication sites and the news sites and all that. It looked like it was kind of across the board.
It did, yeah,
Is that right? Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. Now, that does raise a question, of course, about web parts that you have on your page. Are your web parts going to be translated? I guess it depends on what content. If you've got an SPF Flex part that you built that's pulling back data from the graph, I don't think you could probably translate that stuff. So I would assume that's publishing controls. Publishing.
That's a great question. I mean, back with multilingual support for customizations before modern, you had to really define your labels and the translation terms yourself and essentially pull the language query when you're rendering your web parts. I presume the similar type of action would be in place when you do this. Maybe there will be another layer around it to have it auto-translate. But I think we'll learn more once they actually publish the documentation.
Well, we do know in SPFX we have the resource tags, right? So we
Yes.
can apply multilingual, and
Right.
I know SPFX looks at the browser agent string.
That's correct. Yep.
Right? So if you properly deploy your SPFX solutions, then they should be multilingual
Right.
out of the box. Yeah, all right.
So
Hub site associations now done in the browser. Woohoo! No more PowerShell. Right? Hub site associations on the fly. Did he show if they changed one? If you associated something to a hub site, is it pinned to that, or can you, after the fact, go and change it? Can you associate it with a different one after you've done it once?
Associate what exactly?
A site with a hub site, right? So now you can pick it in the browser, right? And I wonder if you can go and reassign it after the fact. Because I seem to recall there being some issues with the PowerShell when you can make the assignment.
I didn't see that demo in the admin module. You can move them around.
Okay.
So if you're in the admin center
Mm-hmm.
on the SharePoint sites, you can just move them around and stuff.
Yeah.
I haven't played with it too much, but I know that option's there.
Okay.
Or you can just disassociate it all together.
Okay. Now, what was the demo around the menus? There was something around the changing the menus and
Audience
navigation. Is that the audience
Oh, that
targeting?
was the
piece?
audience targeting.
Audience targeting with global navigation now. So you got a comm site with your mega menus, then you can change. I don't know how it works, but you can apply audience targeting to all those navigation nodes, and it'll only show based on your Azure group, your security groups, and whatnot that they tie that to.
Okay. So, but I thought that the menus were security trimmed anyway.
No,
Oh, they're not.
Not the mega
Oh.
menu. So when you have the mega menu and communication sites, communication sites by default are intended to be more public areas within your organization. So they didn't have security trimming up until
Ah.
not even just the mega menu. Both menu types on comm sites are not trimmed whatsoever.
I see. Okay, now it makes sense.
Yeah,
So
the old
audience-
SharePoint on-prem and everything, and old SharePoint Online had trimmed navigation.
Sure, yeah.
Not since modern came out.
Ah, okay. So this now gives us a way to target, and you can do. Did I see this right? You can do groups of links in there, or no? It's based on what you target on the site. Right? You set it at the site level, not in the menu itself. How does that work?
Menu, like I said, I haven't seen the demo, but the current, I'm pretty sure the same navigation setup. They're probably going to add edit links so you can add an audience to each link you set up. Would be my guess. I haven't seen it yet.
What they
in
show?
demos.
Yeah, I haven't seen that part of the demo either.
I don't think they have showed it yet. It's probably going to
Okay.
be during the week here in these demos. So we don't know enough about it yet.
Okay.
I kind of hope that's the way they do
to
it.
come
Give you,
later.
give you more control over it.
Well, I guess it's a 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, right? If you go to your site and you apply audiences to your site, and then it automatically shows up in the menu for your mega menu, right, in your hub association, that would seem to make a lot of sense to me.
So that's kind of one scenario. I mean, the other scenario, think of like quick links, where you might have quick links for HR department users that would be different than IT department users.
Right.
If you had audience targeting on the mega menu itself, you can target external links based on groups as well as security
True
trim
that.
sites.
It's also possible because they in T-Per session just now they showed a new modern hub managed metadata, the
Term store.
term store. There
Yeah,
you go.
modern terms.
They may end up making it where your global nav ties to that, which has the audience targeting too. So we haven't seen it yet, so we don't know. They may not show it yet. They're just announcing that it's coming because it's on the roadmap. It's later than.
I saw that. Did they show the modern term store?
They did.
Yeah.
They showed a very quick demo of what it looks like. It's a refreshed UI.
Uh-huh.
It looks modern. They didn't talk too much about the new functionality, but they did show some additional analytics that are now available in terms of which terms are being used most frequently, who are your top users, and so forth. So it actually gives you a little bit of insight behind it. I'm curious what's going to happen to the content type hub, which is not fully supported with modern today. But with this new tie-in, I wonder if they're going to bring that back or resurrect it in a new form.
Interesting. Well, there's some issues with content types in modern already. We'll talk about more of that with Rob Hogue on Thursday, but there's some definite issues around there. So if they were going to do that, they'd have to fix those problems first. Interesting. A lot of talk. You're going to hear this over and over and over and over again. Fluent UI, fluent framework. You're going to hear a lot of that.
It's pretty
So,
neat what I've seen. So far.
Talk me through it. What's going on here?
I don't know the details. I just know from a user perspective how you can take snapshots of Excel files, like a table section, post it right into Teams, and have everybody just edit that section in line into Teams, and it updates your file.
And in the demo, you see it as you're moving through and changing the cells. I can see it in real. It can't be possibly true real time, but it's pretty.
I mean,
you can see it
It's
happening.
just using a window of co-authoring, which is pretty close to real time now. So, I mean, I'm sure they're improving it.
Yeah, they're just they're narrowed it down to parts of documents instead of it being the whole document at a time.
Right.
So I don't know exactly how they're doing it.
But isn't the idea that we can now build Fluent into our components? So that when we build custom components, which I guess would be like connectable web parts, right? So you're
That's
just
what I was
subscribing
thinking, yes.
to events. We were talking about this earlier, right? There's got to be some provider-consumer model there where you can just wire that into your component. Did they give any details on how that might?
I haven't seen any details.
I don't know.
on
They
it.
haven't gotten into any details, but I kind of got the impression that it was going to be more of a platform where if you want to bring co-authoring experiences into your own tools, and whether part of that is just within your own components or mixing matching, it's kind of more of a framework where you can have API calls essentially constantly updating a centralized messaging server of changes that are happening,
Yeah.
and having similar distribution pattern to come back and be able to do it real time across whatever you're developing. So I think it's more than just co-authoring out of the box. I think there's more to it.
I'm wondering if it's somehow engaging like SignalR or some sort of WebSockets or something like that.
It's got to be something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah,
So,
for messaging.
Since
in
they made such a
between.
big deal about SignalR, whatever, a few months ago, being live, it's like that seems like that would be the perfect.
It would make a lot of
to
sense,
use-
wouldn't it?
to use
Yeah.
for that.
And we may want to scoot up to our mics a little bit because the background noise.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of. I just turned the gain down a little bit. There is a lot of background noise, so we apologize for that. Visual version diffs and pages. So
Oh,
you
that
make
was cool.
pages to your changes to your publishing sites, and now you can visually see the changes that are made. How did that demo?
Very briefly, but it looked very promising.
Yeah, I don't know how many times I've wanted to like look through my version history on pages and see what changed.
Without having to go back to the last version, look at it, trying to remember what you saw, go back to the.
And especially with modern, sometimes you would roll back a version or something, and then your web parts would move off, and then you try to restore it, and it wouldn't restore correctly. So, I'm hoping that gets fixed up.
That one looked really cool in the demo. Did they give a longer demo in Jeff's session, or was it pretty much the same thing we saw?
It was pretty much the same thing.
Okay.
I would say though, like this is a scenario that our customers have been asking for a long time, especially when you're publishing something that requires approval in an intranet. Having the approver be able to mock up what they would change and show you why they're changing, especially around compliance articles. Right now, our clients are copying that into Word, turning on change tracking, emailing it back and forth. And part of it's now just to say you can't say this. Part of it is also to educate the publishers for these are the ways you have to rephrase these types of messages, or these are the things you can't say. So having this in one place is going to save a lot of headache for these scenarios.
Interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that scenario where you're creating versions, right? And then somebody who's the master document owner is looking at the diffs, right? As people start changing those versions to see what they've done. Right?
It would be really neat if you could tie that into a flow in Power Automate to send you changes.
But we haven't talked about that yet. Don't be letting the cat out of the
Oh,
bag.
yeah, that's true. My bad. Okay, well, I just called it a flow. We'll forget the other term for now.
Lists, we've got the column formatting, which we've had for a while, but it was all JSON based. Right now it's gone visual. So you've got a visual editor that you can use to make the column formatting. I don't know how robust that is going to be, or if it's really basic. Did you get a feel for it?
It's kind of basic. I mean, it's more just colors and a couple of conditions that are built in, but it's not real advanced.
Okay.
It's
Pretty
just for a normal user to go in and be able to apply.
But you can still drop back to the JSON, right? And more advanced stuff? Okay.
Yeah, you still have that option. There's still an advanced button on there.
Okay.
Edit the code.
All right. Well, here's a big one that everybody has been asking for, and that is the ability to do list templates again. So we now have although they call it from list, is that what they're calling it? List from list, or from library, or something? Yeah. Anyway, you can create a library or a list from another existing list. So we have
Or an
modern
Excel
list
file
templates.
as well, which rolled out and then they took it away.
Did you say that again?
You can create lists from Excel files
Oh.
as well.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that actually already had launched, but there was a bug and they redacted it. So it was supposed to come along with the list from template.
Ah, okay. So is that preview? Is it GA, or was it just announced?
So we saw that announced at the SharePoint conference earlier in the year. I haven't heard anything new about that yet today, but expecting in the next few days we'll probably get some more timelines around general availability.
Okay. All right. I think, in my experience, right, other than site from template, list from template, right, everybody wants to create their list and then duplicate it, right? Now, I wonder if that crosses site collection
I was
boundaries.
just about to ask that same thing.
Because that was always the problem, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting to see if it's exportable, and then you can move it over to another site as well.
I think you have to download the STP file, right?
That's why you just create those things in Graph and just create a list out of that and throw
Yeah,
it
just
wherever
code
you
it all,
want.
right?
Yeah, there you go.
Developers love that answer. What's this about the mobile app? So obviously they're updating the mobile app with some new features, but I saw something on the list about mobile app branding. So you can put your corporate branding on the mobile app. How does that work?
Yeah, so they showed a brief demo where you can have your own company name appear as the app name, and opening it up shows your company name in the top left corner instead of the SharePoint mobile app.
Okay.
That's about as far as they went with that demo.
Yeah, from what I've seen of that, it's just a shortcut app to the SharePoint app, just to make it feel more like it's personalized to your company. So,
I see.
But they also showed that your company name appearing in the top left,
right.
which I think might be just enough of that little tweak to let people think this is my company.
Yeah,
Okay.
This is SharePoint.
the branding the theme has already come across on mobile, but it doesn't seem like it matches the desktop as much. I'm thinking they might be letting you customize that.
There
a
was
little
a
more.
bullet point that specifically said that the teal theme would be automatically rolled out to the mobile app.
Can't wait.
I know we've all been waiting for that. Biggie, this has been talked about, classic to modern conversion, being able to take classic sites and convert them to modern. I think that's a big minefield. We've all seen some heavily customized, and not even just UI customized, but you think about the lists and the libraries and things that people have created in workflows, and some of those features aren't supported yet. How's that going to work?
I don't know.
Great question.
It's not like you can just spin up a test version of your site like you could on-prem, where you could just copy your content database and then test everything. It's not-
Yeah.
You don't have that luxury anymore. So.
The SharePoint Designer workflows, info path forms, things that are still fully supported within Classic just don't work in
Yeah,
modern.
classic web parts, right? What's going to come over and what isn't? That could be, I think there'd be dragons and lots of them.
I think we'll just call this version 1.
Yeah. Alpha.
I'd be curious how this turns out.
It's very generic. It might work.
I was excited to see the in the admin center where you can turn your classic root site and just point it to another modern site and just update it like that.
Uh-huh.
Just set it as your home site, as your root site, and replace the old one.
And you can swap them out.
Yeah, they got site swap as well.
So you could basically design your new homepage, home site, whatever, swap it out, do some updates, whatever. When you're ready, just keep swapping.
Oh,
them
really?
Out. You could just
That's
reassign the root site to a different site collection. So
Interesting.
I mean, we've all seen the skeletons when you were to take, an old SharePoint site on-prem, do a DB content upgrade, and then it works until someone clicks a link and then
Yeah.
something breaks and it takes forever to troubleshoot. I imagine we'd have similar type of ghosts coming up if we do an automatic conversion.
Yeah.
I mean, the cleanest way is still to spin up a clean modern site and then map your content and migrate it across.
Yeah.
With Microsoft's acquisition of Mover, which
Mover.
I'm sure we'll talk a bit
Yeah.
later.
Yeah, you
But-
got to have some kind of migration tool that makes it so much better.
I think I almost prefer, we have to see it in practice, but I think I almost prefer the old story of migrate it instead of upgrade. I could see a lot of support
agree.
issues around that.
100%.
That should be interesting. Okay, so moving on from SharePoint to Project Cortex. This was a big announcement today. A lot of fanfare, a lot of talk about Project Cortex. So let's put this in perspective, and then we can talk about some of the details. So the reason I use this meme is because this is kind of, they're not messaging it this way, but the way that I see it is this is the next evolution of Delve, right? They were trying to do something with Delve. They never really got there. But the idea was to surface content that's important to you, to start to make some intelligent decisions about that content. And I see that now coming in Project Cortex with especially that Knowledge Center hub or site or whatever they had, Knowledge Center portal. Knowledge Portal, is that what they're calling it?
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
It looked very much to me like, okay, this is what Delve should have been, right, in the beginning. But there's some really interesting pieces to this. Automatically extracting metadata from your documents, being able to create metadata models and train the models to your content. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to work, but there's some machine learning, there's the AI stuff. Okay, let's all be honest, it's a lot of search going on behind the scenes. But nevertheless, right, even if it's a primarily search-driven interface a la Delve, the way that they're exposing that information, that knowledge portal looked pretty cool. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Well,
You're
I
right.
agree.
That was a killer demo.
I like how it picks up terms and stuff from the organization. Everything just hover.
Those cards are really cool. So if
Yeah.
you didn't see the demo, go back and watch the demo. But what happened was when you hover over content, it's picked. I wonder if that's managed metadata. I wonder if it's seeing metadata terms and that's how it knows what to pick up. But in context on pages and in documents I saw, it's highlighting terms. And when you hover over the term, it shows you other documents, people who've worked on that, right? I think they're going again for this whole knowledge network thing of like who's experts about particular topic. Because aren't there people cards? Didn't it show people in that hover like
There are, yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right about the metadata driving the different terms, because they showed a different demo for how you can actually highlight certain client names or project names and map those to keyword and metadata associations, and then essentially go through and just apply the machine learning so that it can go out and find the rest of the similar type of content. So it's all tied together with the new metadata approach.
it looks really slick. Now, how it'll be when it ends up, we have to wait and see. This is obviously one of those early announcements with details forthcoming. It doesn't have an official name yet. Project Cortex is what they're calling it for the time being. So that means it's probably not due to go live, but they were talking about GAing it relatively quickly, I thought.
Early
Yeah,
2020.
just-
Be power something.
It'll be power something, right? Yeah.
One thing
Yeah.
to know,
Power knowledge.
if when you do preview it and the preview comes out and everything, don't expect it to be free. It's listed as a premium service, so keep that in mind
It's a good
when
point.
you go using it. I think it's cool stuff, but you got to pay for it. You got to make it, valuable to the business and justify the cost. So just keep that in mind. It's not going to be part of E3.
Possibly not. Although, as we all know from experience, the biggest challenge with getting our users to use metadata is that initial upload process, right? Of forcing them to go in and set metadata fields. If we can automatically extract that data from our documents, that's huge. That's worth the price of admission, right? Especially if you're legal or medical, anything in healthcare, HIPAA, right? Finance. That's some pretty big stuff.
You got some repeatable forms. Definitely.
Yeah, this could be, watch this space. I think this is going to be a hot one going forward, and hopefully by SharePoint conference we'll see some implementation of this. So what was in the demo that they showed in Jeff's that was different from the keynote?
They covered a lot of the similar concepts. The one thing that I found to be really reinforcing is Project Cortex is built on top of SharePoint Online. They showed us that their custom web parts that they're building firsthand to be able to leverage this content. They're showing you how you can edit the pages, add their web parts as part of Project Cortex. So I think, one, it kind of reinforces that SharePoint is still alive and well, and that's still a great platform to develop upon. But yeah, they showed similar examples where you can automate the tagging of it, you can automate the discovery, you can automate the label application for your retention policies and compliance policies. And then they showed a glimpse of the new term store and how that could all be tied together.
So I think that answers the question. This probably is driven by metadata at the global level, right? So those would go hand in hand of updating the term store to feed this. But it makes sense, right? Because you have to feed that from somewhere. You have to define a model somehow. That seems to me to be the right place that you would do it. But I'm curious how that whole machine learning piece is going to play into this by maybe it's suggesting additional terms or suggesting models or model modifications after the fact. I could see that being.
That's actually one of the things they demoed as well, where if you apply data classifications based on certain patterns in documents or certain keywords, right within Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and so forth, they can actually recommend applying a label to a document that you're working on while you're in that authoring experience.
I don't even think that was part of Cortex. I think that was.
You're absolutely right. I think the lines were a little bit blurred in terms of what was strictly Cortex, what was just new enhancements. And to be honest, we probably won't know where the lines are drawn until it's released.
Right.
But it's
just like Delve was a lot of places, but you really didn't know it was Delve or pulling from Graph.
And it remains to be seen what kind of administrative controls that we have. That was always one of the downsides of Delve, right? As it was sort of a black box and we didn't know what was going on or have any control over.
They did say Delve's not going away, so this is not replacing Delve. It's going to be a supplement to or
Almost seems like Delve is an input into this. There's multiple inputs. Delve is one of them.
I could see
The
that. That makes sense.
Machine learning's another.
I get that.
They did talk about how you can have as little or as much control over curating these knowledge pages, where you can have things for approvals, or you can just auto approve everything, or you can really peel it back. So it'll be interesting to see how it actually plays out in large, complex scenarios.
Okay, interesting. All right. Well, we're going to talk more about this along with more of the ECM content when Rob Bogue joins us on Thursday. So that'll be day 4. That'll be at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, so 1:30 p.m. Central. And we'll deep dive on this and a lot of the other ECM topics with Rob. So moving on to OneDrive, it's a new conference, so we need a new OneDrive UI, right? We got to keep updating the UI. So I didn't seem like it was a huge uplift in the UI, but it definitely looked a little cleaner and maybe a little more user friendly.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see too much difference other than like the thumbnails and the folder icons and things of that nature seemed tweaked, but I didn't notice a major overhaul anywhere.
Yeah, I think the one cool thing that stood out was the ability to sign PDF documents with your finger in OneDrive now on the mobile apps. So
Really?
they gave you essentially a analog e-signature option for
Yeah, so
PDFs.
what we call a wet signature, just
Yeah.
tapping up an image, right? A PNG. And is that a Power Apps feature?
That was a OneDrive feature as they positioned it.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's just built into their file previewer for PDFs.
Uh-huh.
I think it's part of that.
Oh, so it has to be a PDF to capture that. Interesting. Well, that's going after Adobe on their home turf a little bit, isn't it?
I bet they're going to make an easy way to take that and plug it into their e-sign software. Because they're getting pretty integrated together. So
Okay.
I bet they're just using that as a front end, so you can say, "Hey, look, your OneDrive now you can connect it to our Adobe Flow connectors and then send it off to their actual service."
Well, or I could see a use case scenario where wet signatures in a lot of compliance plans are not acceptable.
Exactly.
Right. So you have to have a proper sign process to go through. So maybe that's the easy way out for people who don't need that level of compliance.
Yeah.
Maybe I didn't know about that one. That's a good one. Conversations about documents. So is this happening in Teams or Yammer or where?
Great question. So historically, right, if we have comments within Microsoft Word, meaning like Office 365 comments, we have a comments pane, but you don't have the ability to tag a paragraph or refer to somebody in the context of what you need their help on. You could just mention them and they have to come in and you'd have to specify where they need to look for their feedback. Now you essentially have more of that native Word commenting capability where you can highlight a paragraph and so forth. You can mention somebody, they'll get notified with what their requests are, and they can respond over email or within the document. Provide a few different channels for how you can interact there. But it really takes that whole right panel away and makes it more within the document.
Okay.
So then that right panel, I think that uses, they alternated a few different technologies, right? Yammer was there for part of it. Then I think they moved to something that was more Office Online driven. I'm not quite sure where this lands.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious where they go, and I don't know the details. Is how is it going to work with e-discovery and whatnot on those conversations attached to these files? Where I don't know exactly where it stores those conversations. Is it just going into Azure somewhere, an Azure chat stack that has a link to your files? You really don't know where it saves those conversations where you mention people and have those side conversations on those documents.
Well, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen that part.
Yeah, I haven't seen the demo yet either.
If it's part of the comments, like the Word comments, that I would think it's embedded in the document.
You would
It's actually
think.
part of the external conversations, like it's been. That I think is all stored in Exchange Online. Is my understanding.
Yeah, it's got to store somewhere, especially for non-office files. Like you can't just modify the file and put those conversations in there.
Well, here's the rub, because if you are capturing that content in relation to that document, in theory, it becomes discoverable. Right? So it has to be retained. Well, if it has to be retained, then it has to have a retention policy. Well, what about tagging and classification as it relates to comments around a document?
That's a good question.
Right? What if somebody inadvertently in a comment puts in a social security number? Are we throwing a sensitivity label on the document because of that? Raises a lot of questions, because when you go into OneDrive and you pull up now the hover card and the topic and it shows that chat conversation, there could be PII in there. That could be really interesting.
My understanding is that is the way it's supposed to work.
Really?
If you put PII into a conversation, it's supposed to tag it.
It's supposed to tag it.
It's supposed to be able to tag everything.
Well, we mentioned already the 100 gig limit. We now have this request a document from somebody.
That's a pretty big request.
Yeah. So how does that work?
So Dropbox has had it for a while now, where you can pretty much go to a folder, right-click, say request files, and it'll give you a link that you can send out to just anybody, and they can click the link, upload files, folders, whatever, to you, where you can see them all, but they can't see everybody else's submissions.
Okay.
So it's a good way to go ask for people to submit their documents to you. They can't see everybody else's, but you can see all of it and curate it together. So
that makes sense.
And they ask for your name and stuff, some basic information when you go to upload, so that you have that metadata on your end to see who submitted it and everything. So
Okay,
that's
got
pretty
it.
much what that's for.
So you mentioned this one earlier, Mover. Microsoft has acquired Mover. What does that mean exactly? Does that have near-term impact?
I'm wondering if they're going to are they doing away with their SharePoint migrator and just saying, all right, now we use Mover?
So the last slide of Jeff's presentation was that they're making it available for free as of today,
Right.
which is a pretty big move. And it's part of their overall migration strategy of getting people onto the cloud. So it's going to have rippling effects for all the partners in the space that have been invested for quite a while. I mean, Fast Track started to chip away at that, and then the out-of-the-box SharePoint migration tool started to chip away. Now you have a whole enterprise class product that's available for free. So I'll be curious to see how that evolves.
Interesting. Well, we know it'll be called Power Mover. So let's talk about, did we skip the Power slide, or are we coming up on it?
Yeah, it was in there. I don't remember.
Well, we might be coming up on it. Teams. Let's talk about Teams. What happened to Teams today?
Oh, man. Got a long list of stuff here. So obviously the biggest one, private channels. Everybody's been clamoring for that. It's rolling out this week. You can pretty much create a channel, invite anybody, a subset in your team to these channels, and only they can access that channel, the files, the chats. There is limited support for tabs and the apps, obviously, until they can figure out support to keep it private. And a lot of people wanted to have private channels to bring in guests to only see that channel, not the rest of the team. So it's still only a subset of the teams. I don't think a lot of people realize that. So you got to be careful when you're planning around that. You can work around that by making all your channels private and then inviting a guest, but it's kind of not really the best case scenario. If you have a few channels, sure, but if you got 50 channels, you don't want to make 50 private channels and one public to your guests. So hopefully they come back around and allow member-only access to those private channels.
And I haven't seen the details, but I'm guessing that any files that are shared in the private channel go into a security trim folder inside the document library, so that
it's gonna cause some conflict of opinion, but they're actually creating site collections for private channels.
Oh gosh!
Wow.
So every channel you create is going to be a separate site collection on the back end. They are working.
Yeah.
Right, that's what a lot of people say, but they're working on the UI so you can seamlessly navigate, because you know how the SharePoint backs the team.
Right.
So you have your document library with the private channel will still list on the parent if you have access to it, I think. So they'll make it where you can click on it and it'll navigate into the other library automatically on the other site collection. They're going to try to make it seamless. The site collections aren't going to show up in the admin center. There's kind of a debate there if that should or should not. So they're trying to make it just invisible scaffolding behind the scenes, but it is technically a site collection there. So
Interesting.
That's how that works.
Yeah. So I should mention we're going to try and deep dive Teams on Wednesday if we can get Chris available again. So we'll try and do a deep dive on some more of this, see if we can get a few questions answered. I know there's some team sessions between now and then, so we'll see if we can get some more detail.
Right.
So, carry on.
Multi-window support, to me, that's a big one too. A lot of people use Skype. You can click a chat, have a little window to the side. People are just used to that. You can't do that in Teams. It's all click back and forth. So multi-window, you're going to be able to pop out a chat, pop out a meeting now. So you can pop out the meeting chat as well. Do all that, which you couldn't do before.
I was just talking to someone earlier today, said that's what's holding them back from being effective at Teams. They can't.
Yep.
Yeah, I've said it for a while. It's like it's a single pane of glass for all this stuff, but it's a single pane of glass. So every time you get interrupted, you go to handle a chat request or something. Now you've lost your place on the Word document, so you can go back, which works most of the time.
One of the biggest problems with that is using any tabs or anything in Teams. If someone hits a chat on your banner and you go to reply, you lose your session state. You lost everything you were working on. I'm hoping with the multi-window that'll help out there. That's supposed to be launching for beginning of next year, so not too far out, seems like. Linux client, I'm not a big fan. I'm using Linux, but for the guys that do, it's a big ask. A lot of people have been wanting to have a client in Linux that's native to the OS. So.
Okay, well, that shouldn't have been that hard to build. It's already on Mac OS, so you've already got the core kernel.
Yep. They got some new messaging extensions. So basically, Poly, they've had Poly forever, a bot or an app you can add in to do polls in line in your conversations. You've had forms for surveys, but instead of having to use those, I guess they decided to put in a messaging extension. So you go next to a message, you click the 3 dots under message actions there, you'll have, create a survey or, create a poll right there in line without having to add those apps or bots. It's just built into Teams now.
That's cool. Okay.
Pin channels, this one's, I don't think is going to get a lot of usage unless you have a lot of teams
channels, right?
And a lot of channels. It makes it where you can take ones you work in a lot and often, you can move and pin up to the top. Because right now you can pin your teams, and you can show channels within those teams, but now you can just take a channel and stick it up there.
Well, that's probably pretty useful.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. Okay.
so we'll see how that turns out. I don't think I'll use it too much, but add the teams to SharePoint. They just moved, I think, the link they used to have where they teamify from the bottom left up into the cog window where you can go in and say add teams to the SharePoint site. But they give you a lot more options, so you can take pages and select different pages and lists and add to the team as tabs as well automatically. So helps you add that to everything. This one's kind of interesting. They're adding a link between Outlook and Teams. So you can take an email message, and before you'd have to go look up, find the email address, and forward that email into the team and start a conversation. Well, now they're making it where you can have a button, take that email and the attachment, everything, and select the channel it goes into and start a conversation that way. It's a little more seamless, a little more clean than having to know all the email addresses for the channels to add those emails in. And then another big one, they're adding a task app to Teams. This has been a pretty big gap, I think, in Teams for a while, where you need to follow up on something. You couldn't really before. You could do the save flag and then try to remember to come back to something. But now they're going to have an app on the left that rolls all your tasks from Planner, from To-Do, from your Outlook tasks, all into this app across everything.
That's handy, actually.
And they're adding messaging
I thought
actions.
that's what To-Do was supposed to do.
Yeah.
To-Do didn't quite.
Didn't quite make it.
Yeah, so they're bringing that into Teams, and hopefully they're going to add messaging actions and stuff where you can just flag a message and add it right into your follow-up stuff on your tasks in there. So that'll be nice.
All right.
Yammer app and Teams is self-explanatory. They're adding an app over on the left side for the new Yammer. It integrates. You have it as a tab.
Could we talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, sure.
So in what scenario would you foresee adding Yammer into Teams?
Never.
Seems strange, doesn't it? Yeah, you're crossing the streams, really, aren't you?
Yeah, kind of going inner circle, outer circle.
So you're talking out of both sides of your mouth, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just for a lot of people try to use Teams as a close-knit group working on something, and Yammer is more their open communication. You're not going to have Teams for all this open conversations and topics usually. I mean, some people do create those teams for that reason. I know I do at my organization, so we don't really have a need for Yammer, but we're mid to small size business. So I think for the larger organizations, it may make a little more sense. So
that could be interesting. Okay.
Whiteboard, that's been previewed for a long time in its own product and app and everything. Now it's going to be right in your meeting inside a team, so you can just go hit it while you're having a meeting, do the Microsoft Whiteboard. Live captions, obviously, that's good for hearing impaired, whatever. Yeah. You can talk; it'll start live captioning on the meetings. Nice feature.
Which is fun when you do one with me and it picks up my accent because it has no idea. Azure AI hadn't figured me out yet.
Hasn't figured out y'all yet?
No, it'll get y'all.
Does
It doesn't know how to put the apostrophe, but it'll figure out y'all. Right? It needs some training.
So, presenter control. So you can do a meeting, set security controls, make everybody as attendees so they can't share their screen, come in on unmute. You can force everybody on mute now. It's pretty good. They've been missing that for a long time. You could do that in Skype for the longest time. Now they got that feature parity with the meetings there.
Cool.
So,
all right. So as we said, we'll talk more about trying to dig down into some of these on Wednesday. Here we go. So probably the biggest news of the day circulating around is that Flow has been renamed to Power Automate.
Well,
doesn't really roll off of the tongue.
so kind of.
Yeah.
So they
kind
named where flow is to Power Automate. Flows are still called
of.
flows.
Flows, yes.
So
Confusing.
kind of a gray area there.
Yeah, and we have UI flows now to make it even more confusing. They introduced this concept of UI flows. And then the Power Bots, which is just Power Virtual Agents, which is them trying to move into RPA. I'm not sure that they understand what a minefield that is. RPA is a very difficult nut to crack. And for organizations to really be effective with that requires some pretty sophisticated controls on it. I'm very curious to see how if they could bring RPA to the masses, that's huge. If they could do that, can they do that? Is the question. So for the people who don't know, RPA means you're training a bot to do something for you. So it'll go enter something here, click here, submit this, right? So you're basically training a process to do something that's more than I'm going to construct a workflow. You're actually showing it what to do, right? Go do these things here. Well, as you interact with desktop apps, the Office UI changes all the time. This is one's going to be interesting. Power Apps now in SharePoint libraries. We had them for lists before. It's now coming to libraries.
I'm curious to see what that's like, because I've already done Power Apps using libraries, but I'm wondering what the difference is.
Not sure. It was pretty unclear, kind of vague. Did they show any of that?
They showed a very brief demo. Essentially, the same kind of metadata controls you can get natively in SharePoint lists are now coming to libraries, but in Power Apps.
Okay.
Yeah, because you could always, because technically a library is a list. I mean, they're
Yeah,
the same
it's
thing. It's
just
just one
list.
has attachments and the other is per document.
Well, I think the challenge there is that some metadata might be tagged to the SP file object as opposed to the SP list item object.
That's true.
Right.
So in the modern UI, they would actually pull metadata from both when they show you like the preview cards. So I think with that, they had to do some extra work to get the Power App to be able to pull from both.
Yeah, I'm wondering if
objects.
we're adding a few more functions and things that you can utilize to better work with the attachments as well.
I hope so.
Well, not attachments, the actual
SP file
documents.
Actual documents.
Yeah, because that was a problem. You had to always use Flow to load those in and replace. I'm wondering if you can now natively do that with this support.
Yeah,
So
that'll be
it'd
interesting to see how
look.
that develops. So, which happens to be our topic for tomorrow. So, Wonder Laura herself will be with us tomorrow here live and in person. And we're going to deep dive into all the Power stuff other than Power BI and get her take on it. Obviously, she does training on this. I'd love to hear what she thinks about how customers are going to react to this, these announcements and whatnot. And there's more there under the covers, but we'll dig down into that going forward. From a developer perspective, okay, look, this is Microsoft Ignite. We're not going to get a lot of developer content at Ignite.
They added like a whole 20% more, I think.
20% more than the few we had. But Vesta's here, and there are several sessions where they'll be talking about things this week. Obviously, top of the list, Fluid Framework. How are we going to build components for the Fluid Framework? Make that work across, obviously, SPFX. But that opens up a number of other questions. Office add-ins, how's it going to work for Office add-ins? Are we going to be rebuilding those? Are they updating the Office.js files to enable that? It looks like Excel now. You can natively take things out of Excel into Fluid Framework. So how's that going to work with Excel add-ins? They did make an announcement about some Excel add-in updates, but it wasn't really clear what was going on there. So I think during the week, we'll try and do a further wrap on this. Are you staying until Friday?
Yep.
So we'll try and do a further wrap on this on Friday because there's some sessions coming up on the dev ones that I'd like to sit on and get more notes. So we'll see if we can get some more information about what's coming there. One thing that we do know is being talked about is the concept of M365 components. This is, for lack of a better term, SPFX v Next, which is really just, don't panic. It's not another development framework. Okay, nobody lose their minds. It's extending SPFX to the rest of the platform. So now when you go to create something for Teams, you're really creating an SPFX component, right, and just adding Teams. Well, you'll now be natively be able to pick a Microsoft framework component. So you'll be able to say, yo, Microsoft 365, and pick, are you developing SPFX? This is my understanding of how it's going to work. So I could be completely off base here, but you'll be able to pick a native Teams component, right? Instead of a mixed one, and whatever else they just, I assume a fluid component or one of these React Native things or whatever. So they'll, I think they're just expanding that concept. They've been pretty successful, I think, in SPFX deployment. Now, whether the rest of the Office stack, adopts that or not, hard to say. But certainly for SharePoint and Teams, I think this makes all the sense in the world to have first-class components for Teams that you can deploy, right, from using the same methodology.
And Jeff actually talked about Office add-ins now supporting SPFX as the development platform. So it's a pretty big change.
That's interesting.
And in the same sentence, they also talked about Excel having a new macro language to get away from VBA and be more centered around JSON.
I saw that, yeah.
Office Script, isn't that what they're calling it?
Office Script, which is based on a JavaScript object model.
Right.
So it should be pretty interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll get some more information on that as we go forward this week in talking more about the development platform. A couple of other things I did want to mention. Graph API connectors. So there's a whole new surface of Graph API connectors that you can include. So think of connectors for like Flow, custom connectors, where you can point to some specific endpoint, right? Well, now with Azure and Azure API management, it's now really straightforward. I don't want to say it's easy because there's a lot of configuration to do to get it right, but it's really straightforward to build, say, an Azure function and deploy that as a managed API. All of it RESTful-based, native out of the box, OAuth support and whatnot. So the concept here is that instead of the graph just pointing only inward, the graph can now point outward as well. So, for example, if you're securing an endpoint in Azure Active Directory that's an Azure AD application, right, you can now publish an endpoint to the graph. So you would actually be using the Microsoft Graph to manage that data connection. So rather than having all these because if you think about it, if I've got 10 different endpoints, that's 10 different OAuth tokens and the whole flow that I have to go through for every one. So if I can, and it makes sense because it's already an Azure AD to begin with. So Graph is managing that, and then we can go through the graph to those endpoints. Now I'm just publishing to the graph. I think it's a cool idea.
That's huge.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think it's going to streamline a lot of stuff and increase adoption for the graph. And let's be honest, it's how they're building graph stuff anyway internally, right? By extending all this stuff. And then that leads to the final one, which is the Teams graph extension. So obviously a big point that we've been lacking, the ability to interact with Teams via the graph APIs. Did they announce GA or any dates on that?
I haven't seen it.
We'll try and figure that out for the Teams.
Yeah, I'll try to find that out. I don't pay too much attention to the dev stuff.
Yeah, so we'll have to get you some more information on when that'll be coming. But again, the concept there, you would be able to work with Teams as a first-class graph citizen, like you do with files or on Calendar or whatnot, in your Azure AD applications, in your SPFX components, which I can see some interesting bits there of querying graph for things in an SPFX component that you build, right, and surfacing that to the side. Interesting concept. There's a reason we didn't mention Yammer. We have no Yammer slides. You can go out and find all the Yammer stuff that you want. It's out there. You can watch the videos. I'm sure there'll be plenty. There's Year of Yammer banners around here all over the place.
And
just briefly,
as well.
New Yammer UI, so they've rebuilt it. It's modern Teams-esque, right? So it's a brand new UI for Yammer. That's a good thing, I think, for those people who are using it, where it makes sense. Having a new UI is important. They've improved the web parts that you can drop into pages. And now, I don't want to sell it short, but it's just not a use case that we typically focus on in the Office or our SharePoint team side of things. But they've definitely made a lot of improvements there, and they'll be talking about those.
Yeah, they're definitely making it a lot more integrated across the entire stack, so you can get to it pretty much anywhere, making it a lot more accessible than just having to go to the web page and use it. So.
Yeah. So updates to the mobile app, did they say?
Just what we talked about with the internet branding.
But for Yammer, I mean.
Oh, yeah, no, it's already. What's funny is they've already actually pushed the new Yammer to the mobile app early.
Oh, I
they just
see.
never said anything.
Ah,
so
okay.
the UI on the mobile app's been the new Yammer,
It's
I think,
been there.
for a little while.
See,
I don't know how long, but yeah.
I started to use the mobile app.
So I want to say they were rolling it out soon before this at some point. I don't know when because I don't use it myself either too much. But
Okay.
yeah, those same changes, if they haven't come, they are coming as well. UI overhaul on the mobile app as well.
All right. So our next webcast tomorrow, same time. Again, I want to apologize for all the background noise because we're here out on the expo floor. Tomorrow we'll be in, and for the rest of the week we'll be in the podcast center, so it'll be a little quieter over there, and we'll be able to properly set up in that area. Laura Rogers will be with us tomorrow, and so we'll be really deep diving on all the Power Platform.
I got one more dev thing.
Yes. Go.
Visual Studio Online.
Oh, VS Online. That's a cool thing. We
I
need
don't
to
know
talk
how
about
much
that
that's
this
going to
week.
work in with the SharePoint, with the SharePoint framework and everything, but it's just
I
a
don't
really
know, but
cool
it was
concept.
cool. It was cool. I
It
did
builds-
note
it's
that
not just your code; it builds an entire environment for you.
I think Satya inadvertently asked every hacker in the world to try and get into his VS Online by announcing he signed up for it last night during the keynote. Maybe. Oh, let's all go see if we can figure out his tenant. But yes, VS Online. Very cool stuff. All right, so we are at time. I want to thank everyone for joining us, especially thanks to our fellow panel presenters. Dimitri, thank you for dropping in. We sort of pulled you in last minute, so we appreciate that. Be sure to join us tomorrow. If you're already signed up for the series, you'll already get the invite, but I'll send out another invite to everyone tomorrow morning to make sure that you have it. And then we will probably drag some other folks in at random.
I'll be here.
As well.
I definitely want to talk about Power
So
Apps.
thank you, everybody. We're going to sign off for today, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.
Bye, guys.
Adios.
Thanks, everyone.